Well, we've had some very interesting feedback about the pilot strike at SAFAir, with a number of our staff getting delayed in their flights, and in fact, having some of them cancelled. And of course, the Biz News tribe has not been slow in explaining their anger at what's going on there. But who's at fault? Is it the pilots? Is it SAFAir? We talked this morning with the CEO of CemAir, the founder and CEO of CemAir, and our go-to man when it comes to anything about airline. That's Miles van der Molen. Well, Miles, last time that the two of us had a conversation, it was all about SAFAir and the ownership. Just refresh our memories on what's going on there.
So around November 2023, so almost 2 years ago, a complaint was laid by Lyft and Airlink questioning the ownership structure of SAFAir, which the parent company claimed was a subsidiary, and that's an Irish company called ASL. That matter is still live, although the ownership was found to be non-compliant. No decision was made on the way forward by the international and domestic councils.
So why is that relevant that it's non-compliant? In other words, that ownership of SAFAir does not vest in South Africa, but in fact in Ireland?
Obviously, the airline industry is a very capital-intensive industry, and having access to cheaper finance from Ireland and lower lease rates, it gives them an enormous competitive advantage. It allowed them to expand dramatically post-COVID, which wouldn't have been possible if they didn't have that ownership structure.
Is that not a good thing, though?
Well, it's fine if everybody gets to play by the same rules. So if everybody has access to the same resources, no problem. But when one player has and the others don't, then it skews the market, and that's what we've seen, a dramatically skewed market in favor of SAFAir, which has allowed them to dominate.
So in other words, if it was allowed that you could bring on foreign shareholders or controlling shareholders, you could go out to find an international partner. I guess Airlink could do the same thing, Lyft, etc. Is this the beef?
Exactly. And there are countries that allow it, and there are quite a few countries that limit foreign ownership of airlines. But, if it's limited, it must be limited for everyone. I think there was a plea from Airlink and Lyft back in 23.
So why is it that this is related in any way to what's going on with the pilots now at SAFAir who've gone on strike, the longest ever strike by pilots in South Africa?
Yes, it is a long strike. I think it's about to get to the 2-week mark. It is relevant because it allowed SAFAir to sort of uncontained growth and dominance in the market. If there were more players, crew could vote for their feet. My view as a businessman is markets fix most problems, and if crew are unhappy, they could simply move on. Whereas now that we have a situation where SAFAir is so dominant, there are fewer options, and many of them are looking to leave the country for that and other reasons.
So what are the regulators doing about this ownership structure?
We don't know. There was the previous licensing council got to the end of its term in February this year. There's a new licensing council has been appointed for both the domestic and the international councils. The two are separate, and no members are common between the old and the new. So we're hoping the new council will attend to the matter, that the previous council in the remaining 14 months of their term didn't finalise it, disappointingly.
That's very strange. If you had a company and a board of directors left en masse, well, there'd have to be very unusual circumstances. You can't just give a hospital pass to the next generation that's coming in, especially if you've got something as prickly as this that there is to be dealt with. Is it normal in this area that you would have wholesale changes of boards?
In the early days of the licensing council, we saw only some of the members change. In the last few councils, there's been a completely new council, as we've seen here. Sometimes, but even with a long gap, I think there was a year gap between councils being appointed, which caused chaos in the industry because the council is a central institution to the industry.
It's just basics, getting the basics right. We seem to be dropping the ball all over the place in South Africa, including here.
Indeed, it's not justifiable to have that institution inactive for that length of time.
And now you say there's a direct relationship between what's happened there. They should have dealt with the ownership structure one way or the other 14 or 2 years ago. And now what we're seeing with the behavior by FlySafair or by Safair, in your opinion, against the pilots.
Yeah, in my opinion, the fact that Safair has been allowed to be non-compliant in several respects has resulted in a dominant position and has skewed the entire airline market. There is a substantial portion of the domestic market. And I don't think in the history, other than the early days of SAA, I don't think there's been play of such dominance. And that's definitely due to the differential approach to compliance.
How dominant is it?
I'm not sure. I think there's 60% of the local market is the estimate I have, which is substantial.
But now with the pilots going on strike, is this all the pilots who've downed tools?
No, there are a portion of the pilots. It's difficult to know exactly how many. I think Solidarity, the union involved, has said 2/3, and Safair has said 1/3. But it's a substantial number of pilots, but definitely not all. So they are still operating flights.
And what percentage roughly of their flights are they operating?
So we've seen the greatest cutbacks on what we call the triangle. So Joburg, Durban, Cape Town. Around about 50% of the flights seem to have been withdrawn. On less dense routes, they seem to have withdrawn fewer flights, and on very occasional routes, they seem to be operating the full number of flights.
And is there sufficient capacity from people like CemAir and the other competitors to Safair to be able to pick up that slack?
It does amount to a shock to the market. So we're seeing some days there's sufficient capacity, but peak days there's a shortage of capacity. This obviously results in increasing pricing, and that also quells a bit of demand as well, so that the two kind of meet in the middle.
When you look at something like this, are you expecting that the strike will end soon? And I'm asking this because one needs to go into perhaps the reasons why the pilots are striking. They say it's because they're being told to work too hard and to work not to get a weekend off and so on. Mental health, they say they're using that through the open letter that was distributed by the trade union Solidarity. But from your perspective, are the underlying issues here things that would encourage you perhaps to go out and start bringing in new aircraft to take up the slack that has occurred?
So there's a lot of questions in there. So firstly, on the issue of the crew being worked too hard, there's very clear and well-enforced limits on crew and duty, how many hours crewmen can fly per day, per week, per month, per year, how many days off they need to have, how many days they can work in a row. It's very comprehensive. So my view is Solidarity being a bit mischievous by pushing their narrative and amounts of fear-mongering. And I think it's very similar to what they did when there was an SAA strike, a short SAA strike around about a year ago. It's the same narrative. The limits are international limits, and really, if you operate within them, generally considered that you have sufficient rest time. In terms of expansion, we would only consider expansion when there was enforcement of the current set of rules in the market. This is a short-term shock, and what we want to see is that ownership structure, which it seems to generally be considered accepted as non-compliant, for there to be some penalty and some correction there. And without that, we were very concerned that the local market is, not regular, and that's a huge concern. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that ownership structure. If it went the other way, if the market was freer, would you be happier?
Oh, absolutely. If it was a level playing field, we'd certainly expand our domestic presence. It's a huge concern, and the lack of it of attention that it's received or enforcement is a big concern to us.
I guess the real question for those of us who get onto aeroplanes every day is that, or often, is why now? Why are they striking now? What's the big issue?
It seemed in February there was a change in the rostering system. They went from it was a set roster to what they call an open roster, and that caused a lot of unhappiness amongst the crew. And my understanding, it's festered from there. I would need to say there's a lot of detail there I'm not privy to. So what we see is very high level, sort of the headline level items. But that seems to have been the launch point for this particular dispute.
How many pilots do they have?
I'm under the impression they have between 300 and 400, but I'm not entirely sure.
And relative to CemAir?
We're about 175 to 200. So they do have a fairly large pilot pool, and it's very unionized, their pilot pool.
And yours?
We're not unionized, no.
Oh, that's interesting. So your pilots then would have to negotiate directly, whereas on their perspective, they can go on strike because they've got a union. Is there much difference between the terms of employment of your pilots and SAFAir's?
We're not familiar with exact terms of employment. I mean, it's a market, so people can change. So it is a different operation. As a low-cost carrier, it's fundamentally different to what we do. We have a domestic portion to our organization, but we do have many aircraft based abroad, and that changes the terms of employment considerably. So it's not a like-for-like comparison.
I'd be very interested to hear what your thoughts are on that open letter, because the pilots said they wanted to actually just show that they were serious about it and take a one-day strike. But when they went on strike for one day, they were shut out. There was a lockout. And that's why the strike has now continued for as long as it has. Do we believe them? Or is this also a little solidarity being a bit economic with the truth?
My understanding is that it's primarily been a lockout, threatening a strike, and the response has been a lockout. It amounts to the same thing. It seems that there's very strong positions have been taken, and it's, both sides realize there's a lot at stake. I know from SAFAir's side there's a concern that if they give in to the demands, it will be a further action by flight attendants and engineers. And Solidarity has certainly over the years been a controversial name in the aviation industry, and a lot of people, including me, believe that they're responsible for many of the failures, been very unreasonable. So both sides know if they back down, there'll be long-term consequences for their positions.
But that's quite worrying, given that we're already 2 weeks into the strike. Lots of people have had to postpone their travel plans. And now to book with SAFAir it appears to be something of a risk, because if this strike continues, as may be the case, for a lot longer, well, what guarantee have you got of actually getting onto that flight?
Well, there's no end in sight, but eventually sanity has to prevail, and people are going to have to move forward from their positions. So I think as we get to the 2-week mark, we'll probably see some level of negotiation, but it may well result in a fundamental change of direction if SAFAir is held to a different cost structure.
What happens within the organization, though? I mean, Miles, you are a pilot.
I am.
So you kind of relate to the people who are on the strike in this instance, as well as being an entrepreneur who's built a business as the CEO of it. What happens within the grouping of the pilots? Are they like a band of brothers, and the pilots who are on strike might feel that they've been let down by those who aren't on strike? I mean, just give us some insight on the way the thinking would be going now.
There is some strong cohesion in a group of pilots, and there certainly will be pressure on the non-striking pilots to join the strike. My understanding is some people financially simply can't not work. They simply need the income. A lot of people are still licking their wounds from the COVID period. Those scars linger. So there will be some tensions because of it. Personally, I don't have a union mentality, and I don't believe that unions really add anything to the world. But that's just a personal view. So I'm not one of the collective. If I have an issue, I try and negotiate it away. Whereas this approach is in my view, very destructive. Not only to FAA, not only to the well-being of the individual pilots, but to the confidence of the traveling public. So I don't see anybody gaining here.
Is there another way that this could have been handled?
I've never negotiated with a party, so I can't be sure. But people have taken a very harsh position, and I don't believe that's ever very helpful. most things can be talked away if everybody has the right mindset, but I don't know what happened in this case. But certainly what we're seeing in the press is a lot of misleading statements from both sides, so some very firm positions.
Yeah, the first casualty in war is the truth. But from where you're sitting, it all lies with the underlying, the cause rather than the symptom. This might just be a symptom of fix the underlying regulations, either stop the foreign ownership or allow everybody to be foreign owned. And then you have a level playing field, and then the pilots will have an alternative rather than being with a dominant party here.
Exactly. Voting with your feet is the most powerful way. And then that would be an option. Whereas at the moment, who would invest in an industry which has this underlying issue? It's just not realistic. So to me, the SAFA's compliance is the cause of all.
And the number of pilots in South Africa, if a whole bunch of them, say 100, 200 can go on strike, are there others who could come into that to fill their places if it gets to the point where it's not just a lockout, but in fact retrenchment or firing?
Not in the short term, but everything can be achieved in the long term. The great economics proverb. So the South Africa's tight on pilots at the moment. There's been a lot that have left the country. Been a general outflow for many years, and so it goes in pulses, and we see that for various reasons, for lifestyle, for income in the Middle East, various reasons. And even if there were extra pilots in South Africa, a lot of training is required before they can be brought online. So if somebody starts at SAFAir tomorrow, it would probably be 2 to 3 months before they actually are flying an aircraft online, simply because of the training process that would be required. But of course, given enough time, markets always adjust. We've seen it so many times in aviation and others.
Mm. You've explained that your pilots are not unionized, so there's no sympathy strike likely there. Elsewhere in the industry?
We have no idea. SAFAir is, because of the ongoing compliance issue, is a bit of an outlier. I haven't heard of any other groups of pilots wanting to strike, but it may simply be because I'm uninformed.
Does Solidarity represent any other airlines or have its members in other airlines?
As far as I know, yes. At one point, they did try and get a foothold with CemAir, but it's something that we will always oppose. My understanding is Airlink does have a union, a pilot union, and I have no idea what's happening at Lift. And SA certainly has a pilot union.
So there is still the potential for a sympathy strike, not just for the other pilots who are within SAFAir, but pilots at other airlines. This could then escalate still further.
We'd hate to see it snowball, and we're hoping that it'll be rationalized. But yes, anything is possible at this point, I guess.
Miles van der Molen is the Chief Executive of CemAir. I'm Alec Hogg from biznews.com.